Welcome to the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast with Christopher J. Harris, focusing on life, leadership, family, marriage, and the church. We are providing tools for our inspiration and wisdom for life. Our goal is to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. If you're new to us, we release a brand new podcast weekly on Thursdays. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode. Here's our host, Christopher J. Harris.
Hello, my friends. Welcome again to another episode of the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. I am your host, and I am so honored and so thankful to have you hang out with us for another week. Many of you all are repeat listeners. You're really officially a part of the tribe, and I'm so honored and thankful to have you tune in every single week. And I know that if I am delayed in getting this weekly podcast out, my inbox adds a few emails to it because a few of you all are like, hey, are you okay? Is everything all right? Didn't see this week's episode. So, you know, that's a level of accountability that I appreciate and that I'm honored to have. For those of you that are new to the podcast, this is your first time tuning in with us. Let me say thank you for tuning in. Let me not make any assumptions at all. And so let me simply say to you on the front end of this, that this podcast really focuses in on four ideas: life, leadership, family and marriage, and the church. That is ministry. I am personally passionate about all four of those things, and I believe that when those four things are operating well for those that are in that space, life is really good. I believe that when wisdom becomes a part of your life, your entire life gets better. And so we have been on mission and focused to hone in on that idea. We've got some incredible guests that have been on our podcast in the past. And I just believe that while we have been good and great with our podcast, this is bad English. I know how to talk, but you'll get the idea. It gets gooder and it gets bestest. And so I'm honored to have another incredible guest on the podcast today. We met a number of years ago. We see each other on lots of times at various conferences, and I've been following him for a number of years. I have to honor him by saying Pastor Shawn Lovejoy. I don't know if he still wants to have that title or not right now. But anyways, welcome to the podcast, Shawn Lovejoy. Shawn, how are you today, my friend?
Great, my friend. Great to be with you and great to see you again. And I'm so proud for you and how God is blessing your ministry. And you told me offline, I'll just brag on you. You know, you and your pastor running in a great rhythm together, enjoying life, serving your city. We're recording this right after Easter, and I asked you how Easter was, and the first thing you boasted about was not your attendance of the church, but how many people you served the last week in your community, and that reveals a lot about you, my brother.
Well, I appreciate that. I really think that, you know, boasting about Sunday attendance on Easter or any other Sunday for that matter is really the easy part. I mean, all you need is a couple volunteers to count heads and you're good to go. As a church strategist and as an executive pastor, we want to measure impact. We want to measure life transformation. And so, again, nothing wrong with measuring attendance. I think that's just the starting point. And so I appreciate you recognizing that. You have an amazing story, an amazing background. Of course, currently, you are the founder and the CEO of CourageToLead.com. You are a multi-book author, church consultant, executive coach, the whole nine yards. But I don't want to start there. Let's start with home, and let's start with a little bit of some of your past work.
Yeah, so I've been married for 25 and a half years to my best friend, Trisha. She still likes me, and she keeps renewing for another year every year. So I'm thankful for that. And I have a 20-year-old, a 16-year-old. My second one just started driving. Pray for me. And a soon-to-be 15-year-old. And they all are walking with the Lord. If that sounds like I'm boasting, I'm boasting.
That is huge, man. One of my biggest prayers, I'm a dad of four, but one of my biggest prayers, man, is to be able to set the church up in a way that my kids will fall in love with serving full-time in the church.
Yeah, when we handed off the baton of our church, and we can get into that story. I know you want to hear more. I was most proud of three things. We started a church in our living room, grew to be a mega church, multiple campuses. But when God began to tap me on the shoulder about something new and we decided to hand that baton off, I was most proud of three things. One, we had stayed true to the vision. We'd not become a Christian country club for the frozen chosen. Two, my wife liked me. And three, my kids loved the church. And those are the things that are most personally gratifying to me, after 20 years of vocational ministry.
That's awesome. So let's jump right into it, Shawn. So you talk about this leadership baton. You were a church planter. The church turned into a mega church, and just for the purposes of the conversation, just so that our listeners have context, how many campuses and how many people on average did you guys see on a weekend?
Yeah, so I was a real estate developer teaching a college Sunday school class. God calls me into the ministry, went off to seminary, met a guy who'd planted a church in Denver, Colorado in 1989, before church planting was cool. And when he would tell those stories about people stumbling into his church, not even knowing it was a church, and getting saved with alcohol on their breath and things of the like, I'm like, that's what I'm made to do. So we moved to Metro Atlanta, started a church in my living room. I was 28. I tell church planters all the time, don't start a church when you're 28. You're dumber than you think you are. I was. We didn't know what we were doing. We started with 4 people. I had one other couple go with me. We didn't have a launch team. Never heard the phrase. And this was in 1999. And we were the little engine that could for a couple of years. And then the church just kind of exploded. And we eventually grew to about 3,000 in attendance. We had 4 campuses. They were all live teaching. And it's an amazing story. But I always felt like an executive trapped in a pastor's body. And my business background, and I realized a lot of church planners weren't wired that way. I'm really good with systems and dashboards. I love spreadsheets. I'm a very disciplined, focused person. Church planners are known for not being focused and disciplined. They're hard-charging, entrepreneurial guys, but they have a hard time staying focused. And so we began coaching church planters back in 2001. And I realized over time, my people would even say this. We started a pastors conference in Atlanta at our church called Velocity. We'd bring in 1,000 pastors at a time. But my people would volunteer for that conference. And numerous of them would come up and say to me, wow, you're a good communicator, teacher on Sundays. But when you teach leadership to people, like, you just go to another gear. And so literally over time, I began to realize, I'm a pretty good pastor. I'm a pretty good preacher. I think the church grew in spite of my preaching, to be honest with you. But God's given me a spiritual gift of leadership and coaching and mentoring, young men, young women, all of that. And by 2008, 2009, I approached my wife the first time and just said to her, hey, what would you think about? I got a crazy idea. One of those man ideas. What if we handed the church off? And I just coached leaders full time, to which my wife responded, are you kidding me? I'm just now enjoying this. So God didn't align our hearts right away around this idea, but frankly, it just wouldn't go away. And finally, we came to Unity in 2014. I had no reason to leave, my church, but it was a calling that I could not deny. And we made a prayerful decision to hand the baton off to a 34-year-old young man and launch Courage to Lead full time 4 years ago as the time of this recording. And I'm having the time of my life, Christopher J. I love what I'm doing. I love my life. I love being in my sweet spot. I was a pretty good player, but I'm a great coach. And there are some people that are wired like that.
So I have a few follow-up questions. The first one is going to be probably pretty short for you to answer, and that is this. So from the moment that you started having this happen in your heart, that, okay, maybe I need to hand this thing off. From that moment to the point that you first shared it with your wife, what was that time frame? And then what was the time frame from when you first had the inkling to when God actually aligned you guys' hearts for you to then make something public and then for you to actually hand it off? So give us that those time frames.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys quit right before the harvest. I think a lot of guys quit in the dip. We didn't do that. So first, I think you've got to check your own heart. This wasn't something that I talked to my wife about on a Monday after a low attendance Sunday. We were in a great spot. And I think you need to test and check your motives and all of that. But I'd probably been praying about it for over a year. And I'd actually bought the domain courage2lead.com already back then, just for knowing that one day I was going to do this. And the more I just prayed and processed about it, I just began to feel stronger and stronger and stronger about it. I also began to recognize in there, Christopher, that some of the things that energized me in the early days of my church, some of the things that were a big desire in my heart, my desires begin to shift. God talks about giving you the desires of your heart, and things that once energized me were beginning to drain me. One example of that was preaching. People ask me all the time if I miss preaching. I don't miss preaching every week. I'll be in Denver this week teaching for a church, a couple thousand people. I'll enjoy it, but I don't feel like that's my number one spiritual gift. I don't think it's in my top three. And so the longer you operate outside of your top 3 or 4 spiritual gifts, it begins to wear on you and drain you and drain the energy out of you. And I began to recognize that. I began to dread, getting ready to preach every Sunday. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I wasn't burned out. I mean, we lived in healthy rhythm. I talk about that in my book, Measuring Success. I was never out more than 2 nights a week. I went home at 5 o'clock. I wasn't tired. I wasn't fatigued. Everything's going great. But the things that used to move me and energize me were no longer energizing me. So I began to ask myself some questions. Why do I feel this way? Why are my desires seemingly shifting? And I talked to my wife about that back in 2008, 2009. And over time, I just recognized, wow, I think a lot of burnout in ministry is not necessarily because of the physical toll. It's the emotional toll. I think some guys have outkicked their covers. The church has outgrown them and their abilities. I think the nature of the position has often changed as the ministry or the organization or the company, by the way, has grown. And so your skills and your strengths no longer meet the job description needed for the leader. Now, we recognize this with everybody else on the team, but we're not willing to ask it of ourselves. Henry Cloud, in his book, Necessary Endings, I read through that book during this process. He said, a healthy, self-aware person recognizes it's time to make a move before anyone else does.
That's so very true.
Wow, as best I know it, I think that's me. I think I'm recognizing that God is maybe calling me to do something different before everybody else comes to that reality. Pastors leave under 1 or 2 circumstances: when everyone wants them to leave, or when no one wants them to leave. And I would love for more to leave when no one wants them, to leave. Some pastors are staying too long and outstaying their welcome. It's true in companies and organizations too. That's why the founder of Uber got run out of his company, last year. The founder of Papa John's got the doors locked on him this year. Steve Jobs got run out of his own company one time because he was acting as an entrepreneur when what was really needed in that role going into the future was more of a high-level CEO, face of the organization, not a micromanager. And so there was a time in Apple when Steve Jobs was run out of his own organization and then invited back at a higher level later.
If somebody is listening to this right now and they're not taking notes and a journal is not pumping a little bit faster, they need to go and get their mind and their heart checked, because you just dropped so much wisdom that I think applies almost to every single area of life, regardless of what industry you're in or any of that. And I appreciate your transparency. So last thing I want to talk about with the baton, and then we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about your book, because you got a brand new book out and we want to focus in on that for a minute. But very transparently, if you don't mind, share a little bit about the emotions that came along with leaving something that you birthed. Let's talk about the emotions then of, okay, it's Wednesday after your final Sunday, and you're no longer, your phone isn't ringing anymore for church stuff. What's going on in your mind? What's going on in your heart? What's going on in your emotions?
Great question. Well, I think, once again, I write about this in the book, but I think one of the reasons so many of us stay too long is our identity gets wrapped up in our title. or our position. And God is my witness, Christopher. I think it's one of the reasons a lot of people have asked me, how are you able to transition, so easily and find success? Because I did not have a long grieving process. I prayed long and hard about this. I knew God was doing something in my heart and my life, and I was able to jump and land on both feet and not look back much, to be honest with you, because my identity was never pastor. It just wasn't. Now, that being said, there was a deep grief. When you start something, you birth that thing and you have to hand it off to someone else. I remember my wife asking me, what if he drives it in the ditch? And I sensed it's a real reality. What if the new guy, does not steward this well? And I sensed the Lord say to me, you're only responsible until the last day you're there, number one. Number two, the church is people. So they may take the sign down and the logo down out at the highway, and if Jesus tarries, they're going to do that anyway. None of the churches in Revelation exist anymore in name, but the people that were impacted and the generational effect of that, no one can undo. The enemy cannot undo. And so no matter what happens, people come, people go when you leave a church. Some came back that didn't like me. Some left because they didn't like the new guy as well. But the church, the people go on. And so first we were able to stomach, all the what ifs about the church in that way. And I still get emails and phone calls and Facebook messages and all of that from former church members, by the way, that have been scattered all over the world since then. And they say, I owe everything to the time we spent, in your church years ago, our church. Thank God, for that. But now I'll be honest with you. The other part of that I don't want to skip is the short-sightedness I had when it came to my wife and my children. Trisha looked at me, my wife, at some point during this process, and she said, if I'm not a megachurch pastor's wife, who am I? And I was like, ooh, okay. We got some conversation there we may need to have around that issue. My kids, they didn't see it as a curse to be pastors' kids. It was a blessing. It was a privilege. I went to great lengths to make all of our pastors' kids feel that way and bless them. They did get extra privileges for being my kids because they also bore an extra burden. And so I had to lead my children through all of that. We moved here, began attending a church in Birmingham, and we got in the car the first day at the end of the worship service, and it was deathly quiet. And I said, okay, guys, what's wrong? And my 16-year-old spoke up and said, Dad, no one knows us. No one knows us. And to be honest with you, I sort of bathed in that anonymity. I enjoyed walking in and not everyone clamoring, for my attention and crisis and this and that and the other. But my kids all of a sudden had realized they were treated differently in a very positive way because they were a megachurch pastor's children. And they had to adjust their identity a little bit. So I realized I had to lead my family through that process. And they've come through it very, very healthy. But it's only because I was diligent and we worked on it.
Yeah, offline, I'm gonna have to dig into that some more because I would love to hear your thoughts a little bit more. But for the sake of time and for the sake of our discussion today, you have a brand new book out, Measuring Success, and I always love subtitles in the book. So I'm a little nerdy that way, and I love your subtitle. Your path to significance, satisfaction, and leading yourself at the next level. And I love that because it already infers that the current level is not the permanent place. So we're gonna break all of this down, man. But the book peaked at #1 on Amazon when you released it in church leadership category. And you released the book now, probably, I guess, about almost a month ago now. We're coming up on a month, just been a few weeks. But nonetheless, let's dig into it. Why did you write this book, and what's the concept behind it?
Well, I wrote my first book for pastors in 2008, 2009 was a book on personal leadership called The Measure of Our Success, and how so many of us do tend to get caught up in equating our identity with pastors, to who we are as human beings. We get caught up in the comparison route, and the temptation to copy other leaders, condemn other leaders if we're not growing as big and fast as they are, and all of that. But when my publisher at Baker Books read the book, they pleaded with me. He wept when he read the book. He said, "I've never been a pastor, but this is one of the most deeply penetrating books I've ever read as a man." And they pleaded with me to broaden the content to all people, to all leaders everywhere, both in the marketplace and in ministry. But at the time, I'd had several pastor friends, fall morally. And I think sometimes what drives us is not the Holy Spirit, it's testosterone, as men and other things. And all that gets us in trouble. I just felt compelled at that point to write to pastors. But then, about 2 years ago, I felt God leading me to take the old content of that book 10 years ago. It's sort of like a sermon you preached a decade ago. There's probably a few nuggets in there, but you'd say it a lot differently. I went back and pulled all that out, took the content in a fresh way and approached it, and basically rewrote this for all followers of Jesus everywhere, both in the marketplace and in ministry, and talk about how we measure our success, how we find satisfaction in life, and how we lead ourselves, to the next level, whatever sphere of leadership that God's given us. So it's a book today.
So Shawn, here on our podcast, we believe in honor. We don't flatter, but we definitely believe in honor. So please don't take this as any form of flattery in any way at all. But in preparation for having you in the studio today, I actually spent almost 2 hours in my garage because we redid our home office a little bit, and so I got all these books that are in boxes now, and so your first book, The Measure of Our Success, I read the book when I was a youth pastor, and I've got so many underlined highlights, notes in the margin. It's dovetailed, pig ears, all of that, because I think as the person that you referred to earlier said, I gained so much value in it because it was so relevant and so applicable. And while I have not yet read the new book, I do look forward to getting it. I'm going to download that and get that this week. I just think that if it is any measure close, and no pun intended there, to the measure of our success, everybody that gets the book is in for a treat.
Well, I think it's not only better, I'm a much better writer than I was a decade ago, but I've also got a whole lot more mileage on me. I know you know what I'm talking about, Christopher.
I do.
I've got a lot more mileage, a lot more experience. I've made a lot more mistakes, hiccups, setbacks. I talk a lot about those, in the book. I do go back and talk about, early mistakes in my career in ministry, times when I allowed the church to turn me into a workaholic, as well as the experience I've picked up on, now I've been coaching leaders in the ministry and the marketplace for 18 years. So I've learned a lot about the struggles that other men and women have. And then we built a whole nother section of the book that's just based upon a leadership plan. Most people want to grow. They don't have a plan to grow. So in the book, I talk about a strategic, intentional plan for your own leadership growth. At the end of the day, you have to lead yourself to the next level. No one can lead you to the next level. You have to decide to follow. It's like making disciples. You can't make someone, follow Jesus. They have to choose it. They have to take up their cross. And it's true in every area of our lives. We've got to discipline ourselves. We've got to focus. We've got to set priorities. We've got to get our swagger back. We've got to knock off some rough edges when it comes to how we treat people relationally. All that stuff we talk about, in the book. And it's really an executive coaching manual, if you will, or a leadership coaching manual.
So Shawn, with all of your work that you do as a consultant and all of the churches that you've been in and around, all of the leaders, not just churches, those that are listening to this, you got your hand over in the for-profit world, leading CEOs and business leaders and all those things. What would you say if there was a list that you could develop of 3 to 5 top leadership challenges that are just consistent across the board? What would those be that you see across the board?
Yeah, I can off the top of my head talk, personally, individually, but then also organizationally. The number one mistake I see leaders make is isolation. Isolation.
Wow.
I mean, we're busy. We're busy people. We're overextended. We're overcommitted. In ministry, Sunday comes every 7 days. Everything's urgent, all the time. CEOs trying to figure it out. They're accountable to shareholders, trustees, board members, whatever it might be. They feel this pressure on them all the time. So you just don't ever feel like you can slow down to work on relationships. Not enough time, just not enough time to get everything done. There were years ago, you would ask someone how they're doing and they would say, I'm fine. Now it's always, man, just busy. We're too busy. I mean, there's busy, and then there's what I call the sin of busyness. And so relationships go out the window. Coaching, mentoring, learning go out the window. If you stop learning, you'll stop growing. And if you stop growing and you're the leader, sooner or later, your organization will stop growing. So that's why I believe every leader needs a coach. I have 2 executive coaches. How have I been able to transition from one career to the other, land with both feet, and find great success? I'm not that brilliant. I just have great coaches. And so I know I don't wait until I have enough time and enough money to learn from people farther along than I am. I invest into it today, for future compound, benefit. But that's true of my wife. It's true of my kids. I mean, I've been a part of a startup now for 4 years. We've been a little baby again. And so I've gotten it so much better this time than I did when we started the church years ago. I've maintained a date night and a family night, and we've gone on vacations. And I could have built Courage to Lead even faster and bigger than it is today, but I've not prostituted myself to the business ministry, and I've not neglected my family to do it. And I say in the book, Measuring Success, man, if we burn the midnight oil 7 days a week, we neglect all our relationships, and we step on everybody on our way to the top, is that really success? I don't think so.
And it's interesting because when you start talking about measuring things, why do you think we have gotten to a place in our culture where it's all about, we're measuring social media influence. We are measuring just the bank account, and this is not being unmindful that we have bills to pay and need to provide for ourselves and our families, and even savings and things like that. But it seems like to me, all the stuff that we have set up as a standard for measurement is just the wrong thing to be measuring. Like, how did we get there? How did we get to that point?
Well, I read this morning, once again, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And what is his attack strategy? To attack the most important command in God's word. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. So every single day, he's attacking our ability to keep those at the forefront of our life and our soul. So he throws everything he can at us to get our eyes off the main and get it off on lesser things. And if he can do that, then he's got us. He's got us. And it's easier to measure if we're honest. It's easier to measure numbers than it is relationships. It just is. But I say in the book, here's the way I define our root problem. The reason we have tension, anxiety, frustration, depression, the list goes on and on and on. Our root problem stems from the fact that we've exchanged the world's definition of success for God's definition of success. And I define success this way in measuring success. It's ultimately being loved and respected by those closest to us. God knows me better than anybody else. I want to have favor. I want him to look on me. God does have favorites. We just get to choose whether we are one or not, because God displays his favor over people who know him and love him and pursue him and care more about his big picture than for him. And then I want to be loved and respected by those in my family, not just those on social media. And if I can keep that straight in mind, it's something I have to die to every day. I'm telling you, there's an amazing sense of freedom that comes with being secure in your own skin, not having to do it like somebody else, to do it your way, like Frank Sinatra said, and just run your race that God's called you to run. I can't, until you've experienced it, there is no thrill, there is no high.
Man, this is so good. That brought a smile to my face when you said that God does have his favorites. We just get to choose whether we are one of the favorites or not. I mean, I love that. That is a tweetable for sure. So as you were talking, I had this thought because again, you're on the faith side, you church consultant, all that stuff. But what do you say to business leaders and business owners, CEOs on the for-profit side who have not embraced the life of faith yet, or who are hesitant to embrace faith? Like this whole conversation is within the lens of faith, right? And we get that. But what do you say to them when they haven't gotten to that point yet?
Yeah, I learned this from one of my coaches and mentors. You may know him, but we haven't talked about this. Sam Chan was my coach, has become a great friend of mine, over the years. He's mentored and coached thousands of leaders. He says every leader wants to know two things. How can we grow, and how can we grow more rapidly? And I'm all for growth, but we can't presume on growth. Our responsibility is to get prepared for growth. So in our coaching, we do two things at Courage to Lead. We facilitate leadership growth and organizational health. We have 17 coaches from West Coast to East Coast. Half of them are ministry, half are marketplace now. And we go in and we talk to these guys about what we call the 3 gears of growth: culture, team, and systems. On the ministry side, I can tell you very simply and clearly why most churches aren't growing. They've chosen not to. They've chosen not to have the courageous conversations, make the courageous decisions they need to make around the culture, around the team, or around the systems. But those principles are 127% transferable. And I've proven it now in the marketplace. We're working with a $300 million company, $150 million company, a $50 million a year company, and many others now. And we go in and we talk about culture and team and systems and getting prepared for growth. We want, what if, that God wants to bless us tenfold in what we have now? We've got to get prepared for that. We can't presume on that growth, but I believe healthy things grow. So if we get our culture healthier and we get our team better aligned and structured and we get our systems up to date, elsewise we're kicking our coverage, I call it. If we get prepared for growth, then I believe it enables growth out there infinitely into the future. So that's how we approach the conversation with marketplace leaders. We certainly don't go in with Bible verses on our sleeve, but we don't hide our faith either. And what I've learned in dealing with so many of these organizational leaders, they don't mind that at all, as long as we're not trying to cram it down their throat.
Yeah, Proverbs 11:30, one of my favorite verses. It says, "He that wins souls is wise." So sounds like you're definitely walking wisely in how you engage that. And as you talk about business and the bottom line and culture and teams and systems, it really gives you leverage and influence at various points, probably, to bring the faith conversation or component in there. So that's really, really, really good. So before we make the hard right turn and sort of start to land this plane, I want to give you space. If there's something that I didn't ask or something that you wanted to mention to our audience today, either about CourageToLead.com, your website and consulting business and strategies and all of that, or any of your books that you wanted to mention, or even just any ideas of things that are going on in your heart that you just feel like the world needs to know about. I want to give you space to do that, because we're going to end with some quick fire fun questions that we ask every single guest that comes on the podcast.
That's great, man. Well, I won't sell anything. I'll just speak from my heart a minute if I can. I do talk about this in the book, but it's part of my life. I was a workaholic early in my career, and it did negatively impact my marriage and my family. My wife called me on the carpet in 2001, and out of that arose a need to coach leaders. But first, the call to coach leaders was to keep them sane, centered, and married, which is a good idea, for leaders if they're married, and help them, live productive, healthy lives. Because healthy leaders make up healthy organizations. Successful people make up successful organizations. We can't start at the top. We have to start at the individual level. That's why we focus on leadership growth and organizational health. But we talk about at Courage to Lead, living life in rhythm. I don't believe in balance. I've never met a balanced person. I don't think balance is biblical. I actually think the Bible advocates this idea of living life in rhythm. We invented the 40-hour work week. In ancient times, they worked sun up to sundown, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Do the math. That's 72 hours a week they worked. They didn't have Netflix or electricity, so they just went to bed. And then they got up and they did it again. And it was intense for 6 days. But then that seventh day, there's a total swing in the rhythm. And that word sabbath means to cease striving, as you will know. There's got to be that season in our life daily, that rhythm in our life daily, where we stop working. There's got to be that place weekly where we stop working. We just can't be working all the time. We can't be thinking about it all the time. And I have learned how to get off the treadmill emotionally. I've learned how to maintain a daily finish line. One of the things my wife said to me in 2001, she said, Shawn, every time you walk in the door, we run to see you and you're still on your cell phone. And I realized, man, so I made a commitment, 18 years ago, I would never walk in the door again at the end of the day on my cell phone. Now, sometimes I have to circle the neighborhood a couple of times before I pull in the driveway or idle in the garage, but I've maintained that commitment. And when I'm at home, I want to be home. When I'm at work, I want to be at work. Nothing's worse than feeling guilty at work, thinking you should be at home. And when you're home being guilty, you feel like you should be at work. Instead, there's this focus, on being where your feet are. And I say this in measuring success. Success is being fully where your feet are. So one of the things we do with leaders is just help them and hold them accountable. Accountability is one of the great values of coaching. Success is being fully where our feet are. And so my final parting word of encouragement today for all people be just to say, hey, be where your feet are. Man, if God's given you a job and someone's paying you money, be faithful. Don't be on Facebook or LinkedIn when you're supposed to be working, or Instagram. Don't be talking to mama when you should be working. Be intense. Bring your all. Bring excellence. Be the best. Glorify God in your work. But then shut it down. Be home. Make eye contact. Love your kid, father, husband, wife, mother, human being. And take a vacation. Take a date night. Take a family night. Enjoy the journey. And that, my friend, is the greatest feeling of a personal gratifying success that I feel on a daily, weekly basis. It's with those who love and respect me the most that are closest to me.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. No need for me to try to come up and preach another sermon after that, because that was wisdom personified. It was real life experience learned through the graduate school of hard knocks and real life. And so, Shawn, thank you for your transparency. So we have fun on the podcast. Every single episode, and I shouldn't say every single episode, but 99% of every episode that we have, I get a chance toward the tail end to ask these quick fire questions of all of my guests. And it gives us a whole nother lens and a whole nother angle to see the inside of the lives of those that are on the podcast. So here's the goal. I'm going to ask the question. Your goal is to answer it with the first thought as soon as you can that comes to mind. Cool?
Got it, man.
All right, let's go. Apple or PC?
Apple.
Favorite TV show?
Greatest American Hero from the 80s. How about that?
Favorite movie?
Star Wars.
Top 3 items on your bucket list?
Israel, Rome, and London.
So all travel, all related to travel.
Yeah, all the stupid, life-threatening things I'm going to do probably.
Okay. All right. What book other than the Bible has had the most impact on your life?
I would say a great book that Craig Groeschel recommended me. He told me it was required reading for all of his kids called Compound Habits. The compound effect. The compound effect. It just talks about the compound effect that habits have over time. And man, I do. Craig told me that years ago, and it's become kind of a cornerstone, of my life of just building consistent habits in my life and becoming a more disciplined, focused, prioritized person.
What's been the highest moment of your life?
Wow. Wow. I would say, one of the top moments was, standing in a pastor's conference last week at the ARC conference in Birmingham, just happened to be. And I was worshiping with my two daughters, 20 and 16. And Rob Ketterling, pastor up in Minneapolis, had all the pastors stand up that had wayward children. And a third of the room stood up, brother. And I began to just weep. One, to over those pastors and their brokenness, knowing that here they are, men and women of God and had wayward children. But three, just my kids in that moment to be worshiping with their hands up, lifted high right beside me, in that moment. It's one of the greatest feelings ever, man. One of the greatest feelings ever.
Love it. Love it. What's your favorite food, Shawn? Your favorite meal?
Oh my gosh. So I've been vegetarian for 5 years, but you can't beat black-eyed peas and fried okra. Beat it.
Man, if I didn't know any better, I would think that you're from the country.
Yes, I am, man. Yes, I am.
I love it. Okay, Shawn, here's the real question. Quick fire question. What are you not very good at?
Oh man, what I'm not very good at. My challenge is that I'm average at a lot of things. I'm average at a lot of things. I would say I'm not great at administration. I'm good at systems. I'm strategic in that way. I can put them into place. But then managing those systems day to day, I've learned over time I need to hand those off to someone else and let them run them because they'll tend to get wobbly over time. So I have a great team around me. I'm great at building the system, putting it into place, and then I need to hand it off to someone else to run it because I'm not good at running the system organizationally.
All right, two more questions. Number one, this is going to be funny. All right, what has been the funniest thing that has ever happened to you in public?
Oh my gosh. I got arrested. It's funny now. I got arrested when I was 19. That's a long, long story. I got pulled over for speeding. I didn't think I was speeding. And so my friend said, well, here, I had lost my wallet a couple of days before. And so my friend and I looked closely alike. Everybody thought we were brothers, but we weren't. He said, well, here, we're not speeding. Just hand him my license and he'll probably check us and let us go. Make a long story short, I got arrested for falsifying information to the authorities. It was the most hilarious 24 hours in my life. And people make fun of me now because I share it pretty transparently. It's one of the top two dumbest things I've ever done in life. Falsified information to the police. How that, bro?
That is hilarious. So you had to pray for a clean record then, huh?
I did. It did get expunged, though. It did get expunged. I do not have a criminal record today.
Okay, amen. All right, here's the last question. Did you win any superlatives in high school?
I was the fastest guy in my high school, believe it or not. 40 yards. I could beat anybody at 40 yards. So I was about a 4.55 guy. So I was the fastest guy in my school. at the time. Now we were a Class 2A school. We were a small school, but I was also class president my 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade years. Okay. And I boast about the fact that I was 13th in my graduating class academically, but I only graduated with 64 people. Yes, I'm from the country, as if my accent didn't give that away.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. We have had the time of our lives today. I have been privileged and honored and blessed. First of all, I hope y'all realize how hard it is to catch up with Shawn Lovejoy, first of all. So the fact that the Wise Idea podcast was able to do it, I should get, some of y'all should send me like gift cards with lunch or something for the marathon that it took to be able to, at some point in life, to have this interview with Shawn Lovejoy. But all jokes aside, he is a man on a mission, and that mission is very clear, and he's helping leaders and organizations to recalibrate. And there's not a lot of people who are concerned about the hearts and inner life of leaders. So, Shawn, I appreciate that about you. Honored to have you on today. And I know that this will not be the last time that we have you on the podcast. There's going to be something else that comes up that you're going to be able to speak into. And again, I'm blessed and honored to have you on and to be connected to you. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let me say thank you to all of you that have tuned in today to the Wise Idea podcast. Our announcer is going to come at this time to share some more details with you and to let you know how to connect with us. But let me give a personal invitation to each one of you. Please go to iTunes personally or Google Play or wherever you listen to podcasts. And I want to invite you, please, to leave a rating and a review. That's actually how other listeners find us. Of course, if you want to donate or support the podcast financially, we won't shy away from that. We appreciate that in advance. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. And I'm going to end today's episode the same way I end every single episode. And that is my challenge to you, to live wisely.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of the Wise Idea podcast with Christopher J. Harris. We hope you enjoyed our time together. If you did and would like additional resources and information, you can find the previous episodes, show notes, featured guest information, and more at www.thewise-ideapodcast.com. We also invite you to join the conversation on social media. The Wise Idea Podcast is on Twitter and Facebook. Find us at The Wise Idea and at our Facebook group, The Wise Idea Podcast. On Instagram, find us at The Wise Idea Podcast. Our host is also on social media. You can find him regularly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest, all located at CJ Harris 1. Finally, if you enjoyed what you've heard, head over to iTunes and or Google Play and leave a rating and review for other listeners to find us. Our podcast is also on Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you the next time. Live wisely.